My personal opinion would. Well, perhaps. Good cop, bad cop.
Welcome to our meeting. The date is January 14, 2025. The time is 7 p.m. This is an open meeting of the Grand Island City Council. The City of Grand Island abides by the Open Meetings Act in conducting business. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is displayed in the back of this room as required by state law. The City Council may vote to go into closed session on any agenda item as allowed by state law. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that tonight we are joined by Scout Troop 316. And I had a chance to visit with these scouts before our meeting began. They are working on their citizenship in the community badges, and they told me about all the helpful things they do for Grand Island, such as helping at the state fair, among other things. And I must say, it is inspiring to listen to their enthusiasm for community service. These scouts are a great example for all of us, and I welcome you here this evening. I want to introduce the scouts who are here on behalf of Troop 316. They are Kyle Brown, Raymond McBride, Kenneth Meyer, and George Wannick. And we have some, thank you for standing, gentlemen. We have some sponsors who I'd also ask to stand: Kim Fansteel, Sue Hoffman, Kevin Boylson, the district executive, and Dave Plond, the territory executive. Now, I call the scouts and the sponsors of Troop 316 forward to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for your service, Scouts. Thank you for being here. It's always nice when we have Boy Scouts and adult Scouts come to visit us from time to time. The City Clerk will now perform roll call.
Council President Sheard.
Present.
Councilmember Stelk. Councilmember Conley.
Present.
Councilmember Nickerson.
Present.
Councilmember Brown.
Present.
Councilmember Hazy.
Present.
Councilmember Mendoza will be absent. Councilmember O'Neill.
Present.
Councilmember Pollack.
Present.
Councilmember Lanfear. And Mayor Steele.
Present. Also present is Jill Grenier, the City Clerk, Laura McAloon, the City Administrator, Matthew Gleason, the Finance Director, Carrie Fisk, the City Attorney, Keith Kurtz, the Public Works Director, and Patrick Brown, the Chief Financial Officer and Assistant City Administrator. Individuals who have appropriate items for City Council consideration should complete the request for future agenda items form located at the information booth. If the issue can be handled administratively without council action, notification will be provided. If the item is scheduled for a meeting or study session, notification of the date will be given. Council members, do you wish to remove any of tonight's consent agenda items for further discussion? Mr. Hossie.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to remove 7O.
Seven O is removed. Hearing nothing further, we shall continue. A sign-up sheet was available in the lobby for individuals wishing to provide input on any of tonight's agenda items. If you did not sign up to speak on an agenda item, please come forward, state your name and the agenda topic on which you will be speaking.
Daryl Pools, just 6A, just a comment on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is 6A, presentation of the city's 2025 housing study. Mr. Nabity?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For many of you who have been on the council for a number of years, you have seen numerous housing studies. We typically do them every 5 years. The 5-year timeline is set by a couple of things. One, by the Department of Housing and Urban Development in order to continue to receive funds from HUD and have funds available to us. We need to have an updated study. They consider an updated study every 5 years, a study that's done every 5 years. The other one is the state of Nebraska in the last several years has passed numerous housing legislative bills, and in order to do workforce housing, to be eligible for workforce housing grants and so on, we need to have a study that is done at least every 5 years. So when you start to wonder, well, why do we do it every 5 years? It's because we have some legislative requirements that we have an updated study. So we did the last one. It was adopted presented in December of 2019 for 2020 through 2025. We are here in January of 2025 presenting the next 5-year study, which will take us through to 2030. This may be the last study that I work on, but I will be here for most of the time of this study. This time we worked again with the Economic Development Corporation to actually bring the study forward and help fund the study. They are eligible for some grants from NIFA, the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority, that the city is not eligible for, but they're eligible for them, so they were able to get some funding for our housing study from NIFA. We also helped with the study with funds from our community development block grants that we receive. So that's how the study was paid for. The CRA also contributed to the study as well. So the study itself is done every 5 years. This time we hired RDG out of Omaha. They are a planning and design group. Amy Hazy is one of the principals with RDG. Amy and I have worked together for well over 25 years here in Nebraska. She does housing studies and everywhere from North Dakota to Texas, but is based in Omaha, and so she actually gets to drive home tonight instead of spending the night in a hotel after presenting at this meeting. With that, I would like to introduce Amy Hazy. She will be doing the presentation today. She did a much more in-depth presentation at 10 o'clock this morning at the Housing Summit. She talked for about an hour. I've asked her to keep this to about 10, maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. Amy?
Thank you, Chad. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be back in Grand Island and being part of this effort. It's such an important topic to so many communities. As Chad said, I'm going to boil down about a 55-page report into about a 10-minute presentation or so, but I'll be happy to answer any detailed questions that you might have. The biggest difference probably between what I'm going to cover today and what I covered this morning is that this morning I went into a lot more in-depth on the market analysis piece itself. So if there's some particular questions that you have there, we're happy to dive into it. I'm just going to hit on kind of two key pieces here. There's a lot of data that goes into the models that we develop and the projections that we develop, but I'm going to kind of key in on two things. One of them being the population analysis. Where are we at today, and where do we think we're going to be growing into the future? There's three scenarios that we look at here. The first one, the bottom green line, is your natural population change. So basically in this, we say, if nobody moved in or out of the community and all we had were statistically average birth and death rates, what do we think your population would be? Your population would continue to grow, so that tells us you have a young population. You'd have more births than deaths. But we know your historic growth pattern has not been that way. You've been around about a 1% annual growth rate, which would put you in 2035 at about 62,000 if you kept that sort of pace of growth. So the next step in the process then is, what do we need? How many units do we need to continue to support that kind of growth? And I'm not going to go through all the details in this table, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. We assume the average household size will probably stay about the same. You have a younger population, so at 2.5 people per household, you're actually a little bit above kind of the statewide average, but pretty close. We also assumed that the vacancy rate would stay about steady. Now, we often talk sometimes about a healthy vacancy rate, and that's usually in the 5 to 7% range. So you are a little bit on the lower side of that range. And when we say healthy, it is important for a community to have some vacancy, right? Because we want units available when somebody moves to your community, that they've got options. When somebody says this house or this unit doesn't really meet our needs anymore of our family, they need to have options in the market. So you do need to have some vacancy to provide those opportunities. So with those factors all kind of considered in, we also consider that you're going to lose some units every year, right? Units are converted to other uses, they're demolished. Someone takes a home that one time was divided up into 3 units and they convert it back to 1 unit. You just lost 2 units in your market. So those are the things we factor into these calculations. But to reach that 62,000, we estimate that you're going to need about almost 3,000 units over the next 10 years. That puts your annual construction rate just a little bit above what you have been seeing. You've had some years over the last 10 years where you've been up closer to 300 units or more, but generally speaking, you've kind of been below this 273. So it's still a good pace that you would be needing to maintain. Okay, so we take the market analysis. At the same time we were doing the market analysis, we were also gaining some public input, mostly through an online survey, which we had great response from, but also then stakeholder interviews and lots of conversations with folks. Putting that together with the market analysis, we began to identify what do we see as some of our assets and what do we see as some of our challenges. It's often really easy in housing studies to identify all the problems that we have, but we also think it's really important to identify what are we doing right, what are the opportunities, because we sometimes have to build on those or use those to leverage to address the challenges we have. Willing partners. That one kind of first jumped out. We've got a lot of people in the community that are interested in being at the table and helping build the housing that we need. You have building activity happening in every quadrant of the city. This isn't a pattern that you were seeing 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now we're seeing that, which is really important. Your best source of affordable housing will be your existing housing stock. And when we see reinvestment happening in neighborhoods and around the whole community, that means we're maintaining that older housing stock, which is going to be really important. We can't, I had one partner one time say, we're not going to fully build our way out of this, right? That's a piece of it. We got to build more units, but we have to maintain the units that we have too. We can't lose those units. You have a wide variety of new housing options, which is a really great thing to see too. So often we see in communities that we need more housing variety, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. You're seeing some of that happening. We definitely could use more of it, but the momentum is there, and that's a really great sign. And you also have a strong stock of affordable housing. And the thing that we talked about a lot this morning is, again, that's your older housing stock. And the challenge we have there is people are living in it and they're not moving because they don't see other options in the market. So they're staying where they're at. Some of the other challenges maybe that we see, we have a shortage of housing at every price point and product type. So one of the things that jumped out at us in the data right away is we have both shortages at the most affordable range, but we also still have shortages at the higher range too. So we need everything. We need that mix of housing that'll help get more movement happening in the market. We lack a nonprofit developer focused solely on Grand Island. This is kind of unique for a community your size that you don't have something like this that's working in this realm. I would emphasize that when we talk about a nonprofit developer, this is a group that's going to work in an area or in projects that are not profitable, that the private market can't be successful at. They're going to maybe break even, but they're going to fill a gap that we often have. And I'll talk about a couple different types of programs and initiatives. We also saw a little bit of a disconnect between what the market has the ability to produce and maybe sometimes what the market is desiring. This is not just a Grand Island issue. This is something we're seeing kind of nationally right now, right? Everybody's beginning to we're seeing a little bit of readjustment and folks understanding what a first-time home is maybe going to mean and how we build equity to get to that next level. We also heard a lot about valuations and folks struggling with valuation increases driving up their property taxes and how they were going to be meeting those rising costs. Okay, so we identified some key goals. I'm going to talk real quick about some of the objectives of those. So starting with Goal 1, preserving existing housing and strategically reinvesting in our neighborhoods for the next generation. Again, our older housing stock is our best source of affordable housing. Our stakeholder group, or our steering committee that we worked with, really wanted this one to be a pretty important goal, that they really saw that we need to continue to reinvest in that existing housing stock. And it really provides those options for first-time home buyers, and it extends the life of our best source of housing. Goal 2, we need to expand our housing partnerships. So we've got some. Who else do we need to bring to the table? And this just helps a community to build capacity in this area and build awareness. Goal 3, decrease housing insecurity. So we just want to make sure that we're securing the health and well-being of all Grand Island residents, that we're growing a sense of community, we're decreasing any displacement and homelessness. Goal 4, remove barriers and expand an understanding of the housing market. So how are we making sure people are understanding what it takes to become a home buyer, being ready to be a home buyer, being ready to be a renter, what it maybe means, some of the changes that we've seen in the market lately with the increases in land, material, and labor costs, and what that means for housing costs and maybe what you're going to come to and be able to purchase. So I want to dive a little bit into the strategies. Now, a number of these strategies apply to and will help us implement a number of the goals, or more than one goal. Starting with expand and support the Housing Coalition. So we've got a great coalition. Who else do we need to bring to the table, from the banking community to our major employers, all of those individuals that we need to make sure are also at the table as part of that coalition. Expanding Build Grand Island. You guys are doing great things with Build Grand Island. You've had a lot of success with some of the workforce housing funds. How can we expand those funds to even do more of the work that we're seeing out there, but also maybe potentially provide you with some more flexibility? Establish a nonprofit housing developer focused solely on Grand Island. So I kind of touched on this one already, and we had a good discussion about this in the morning session too, but just having an entity that can work in that realm where the private market can't be successful. Establish a vacant housing registry. One of the things that we delved into and talking about this morning is what's making up our vacant housing. And this registry might help understand that a little bit better. You know, if it's the home that is sitting vacant because mom or dad passed away and we're just overwhelmed with cleaning it out and getting it back on the market, how can we help that individual get that home on the market, right? We need it on the market. Our vacant units today are only a very small portion of the overall demand of 3,000 units that we need. But when we can, we need to be filling those units if possible. Expanding our rehab loans and grants for housing development. So right now, you guys, as you're aware, you're doing some of those programs with CBDG funds and so forth. How do we continue to expand that? How do we maybe engage our nonprofit developer in helping us do some of that? Interim assistance with valuation increases. So one of the things we heard through the public engagement, it was probably more so for some of our senior households on fixed income. Those households are often eligible for homestead exemptions and other things. How do we make sure that they're aware of those programs that are out there for them, but maybe providing some interim assistance to households that are maybe struggling with that to get them to kind of better financial footing. Expand funding on rent and utility assistance. And then the last one on here I think is really important. It was something we heard quite frequently, and that's construction of units for our 55-plus households, especially our lower income households that might be living in that $180,000, $200,000 unit. They might not be able to take that all, even if it's paid off. It might still not be enough to go buy a brand new townhome, but how do we help them find the housing unit that's appropriate for them and get their housing unit on the market for that young family and that maybe that first-time home buyer option. It's really interesting when we look at the number. When you look at owner-occupied housing, 50% of it is occupied by individuals over the age of 55. So in the next 10 years, we could really see quite a bit of churn in that, but one of the things that could help with that is that additional variety within the market. Also, thinking about some of the other strategies, expanding the way that we're doing lot development. We're going to continue in Nebraska to see a lot of TIF being used in many cities to do lot development. We're not saying we go away from that, but what are maybe some other potential options that we could look at, especially if it helps incentivize certain product types or specific price points. Development of a community land trust. So this is a way to provide a little bit more what we sometimes refer to as kind of permanent affordability. I don't know if it's permanent, but it's usually 99-year lease, so that sounds pretty permanent to me because I probably won't be here when that runs out. And so it's a way to continue when we put funding in for an affordable unit to help maintain that for a longer period of time. Regularly review city ordinances. Do we have anything in there that's creating a hurdle to a specific product type or lot size or whatever it might be? Education, making sure that folks understand all the opportunities that are out there and then what it takes to be kind of a good renter, what it means to be ready to purchase a home. And then finally, we identify a few things that are really initiatives that have to be addressed at the state and federal level, because they're not local issues, capital gains tax sorts of things, some of the property tax issues that we've heard about. Those are things that have to be addressed at the state and federal issue, but we like to put it out there as a community, can we continue to lobby maybe with our other Nebraska communities to address these sorts of issues. So I feel like I just did a whole fire hose of information. I'm going to take a breath and answer any questions that you have.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We are often told we need affordable housing, but you said something intriguing because you said our older housing stock is the best source of affordable housing, and that maybe that's not a surprise to some, but it's something I've overlooked because I always assume affordable housing has to be built. And you're saying, no, what you have right now is the best source of affordable housing.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's your only source. We are still going to have to continue to build, and we talk about that quite a bit, especially when we start looking at different ends of the spectrum. And we'll refer to it sometimes as the filtering effect. So if we're building, maybe at the higher end, we're going to get folks to move out. But we also realize, of all those households that are maybe living in a unit they're only spending maybe 5 or 10% of their income, and 30% means your cost burden. And so they're spending very, very little. We're not going to get all of those households to move and free up that affordable unit because they like their neighborhood, they like their home, whatever it might be. So you still do need to see some new construction, but we don't. But when we can provide different product types potentially for them to move around to that meets their stage of life, it can free that more affordable unit up. We also see that sometimes even in the rental side. There's been some studies shown that just getting rental production done at any price point helps create movement in the market and opens up some of those lower value, lower rental priced units to lower income households too.
But the one thing that always seems to happen is the request to build new construction and call it affordable housing. So I think that's one reason why I'm always focused on building new, is because that's what always is said to us from that podium. But I don't know, as far as your study, did you make any analysis of how we're doing with maintaining our older housing stock, since that's a component of affordability?
Yeah, I think when we see the correlation that I would make there is that we are seeing average sale prices continue to increase. That we see in other communities where it probably hasn't increased or it's stagnated. I have a community that I've recently worked with, not in the state of Nebraska, where we're seeing much lower home values, and that usually is a reflection of the quality of the housing stock. So the fact that your existing housing stock, when we look at existing sales, when we look at your valuations, is really maintaining pretty strong, that's a good indication to us that we are seeing investment. And really, as a person who doesn't live here, I come through Grand Island frequently, but not here day to day. I can drive around and easily see there's a lot of people investing in their existing homes, which is a really good sign.
You also said that for a city of our size, it was remarkable, or you pointed it out, that we do not have a nonprofit developer.
Yeah, it's a little unusual that you don't have a nonprofit developer who's focused just on Grand Island. We see smaller communities than this, than Grand Island. Wayne has a nonprofit developer that's doing some of these programs. So it's a little unusual. It's not like every city has one, but Lincoln has one or two, Omaha has a handful, but it does provide just one more kind of advocate at the table who's doing projects.
Since we don't have one, can you flesh out essentially how a nonprofit developer works?
Sure. So we had this discussion a little bit this morning too. So first of all, they can grow out of a lot of different types of organizations and entities. We've seen them grow out of economic development groups. I think that's probably how the one in Wayne did. It's what I've seen down in Dodge City, Kansas. But we've also seen them grow out of, in Omaha, there's Holy Name Housing, and they grew out of a church. And their first initial mission was to do housing rehab in the neighborhood around the church, and then they grew from there to now actually doing low-income housing tax credit projects and so forth. So they really can grow out of different sorts of entities or places. It varies from community to community. And we also had the question of how do they maybe initially get funded? Well, it kind of varies. Probably they're initially going out and getting those grants and other funding sources, going out and looking at the philanthropic community to help them get started on their initial mission. Once they grow kind of in size and capacity, so I'll give you an example. In the Wayne program, this is at least 10 years ago, so I can't speak to maybe what they're absolutely currently doing, but they were doing a purchase rehab resale program. They would go out and get home federal funds to do that, so they apply to the state of Nebraska to get, that's who because of the size of the community they are. But they would get those federal funds and use those to fund the programs they were doing. So the funding, but they also used LB 840 dollars we've seen in some communities. So it just varies on how they find the funding and where they kind of grow out of. Was that the long answer to a shorter question?
And as a model, I mean, you mentioned Omaha, I think you said Dodge City, Kansas.
Yeah.
You said Wayne. Would Wayne be a good case study to look at?
Yeah, they would all be kind of great and different examples. The other one we talked about this morning too, that's also a great resource, is Neighbor Works Northeast Nebraska. So they work in Norfolk and Columbus. They'd actually probably be even a really great resource for you to chat with too, because they were working in kind of a little bit more comparably sized cities.
Thank you for answering my questions, and thank you for being here tonight. Mr. Nickerson?
Amy, thank you for a very comprehensive report. Looks like a lot of good work went into that. I have a few rentals myself, and one of the things that I've noticed 2 years ago, I haven't had any turnover for more than 2 years, but I don't know exactly how we're sitting now. But I know that when I had a rental come open, I would have up to 140 inquiries about that 2 years ago. That was the type of demand I was seeing on the properties that I had. And so we know the need is there. And I don't think it's got a heck of a lot better since then. So, you know, the housing study continues to just support the fact that we need housing. And this council has been very supportive over the last 15, 20 years of that, and I think we've seen some good results. But we want to obviously continue to go forward with that. Part of the things I noticed in your study, it's actually proposing 1,800 owner-occupied versus 1,200 rentals. I'm wondering how that 60-40 ratio is determined. Is that a rule of thumb, or is just kind of where's that come from?
Yeah, you know, we base it a little bit on where your split is on owner-renter occupancy today. I will say some communities, especially if we haven't been seeing much rental construction happening, we might do more of a 50-50 split. Grand Island's seen some pretty good momentum there, so we went to something that's a little bit closer to your actual mix of housing that you have today. But, you know, that can kind of vary. Just it's based a little bit on what we see from the census number of your owner-renter split that you have today, and a little bit on the input we're getting maybe from community members. Could it be, 55-45 potentially, but probably somewhere in that range. I don't think it would be any less than 60 or than 40% for sure. I would say you're probably needing to be in that 40 to 50% range for a renter.
For the renters, yes. With the price of housing, the price of the cost of housing, the price of building, 6 to 7% interest rates, that all has to factor into this ability to even build homes that people are going to buy. And we're seeing that even right now. Right. New construction homes have been on the market more than a year. Some of them have been listed 2 and 3 times over the last 2 years. And they're in that 400,000+ range. Yeah. So how do you deal with that, trying to get things, what our community is showing and the economic current climate, whatever you want to call it, showing that that's just pretty unaffordable for most people. And I think your study did talk about ranges that are obviously going to be more palatable to a community, but I don't know how we get down to those levels other than you're shrinking the house, which we have also been doing.
Right, yeah. I think that's a really good point. So it's probably a little bit different product type. One of the things that we talked about, especially on that first-time home buyer sort of piece, this goes back to the challenge that I noted of kind of what the market can produce, maybe, and with a disconnect with maybe what some individuals are maybe desiring, and that is especially if you're looking at kind of new construction first-time home buyer, what we're seeing in some markets is that's shifting to things like townhomes, where you can build equity, that you would take that equity then in the next home to have that ranch home that you might want, the single-family detached home. And so I think that's where we're going to maybe start to see a little bit of that shift happening. Your note, too, I just want to, your comment there, and I want to speak to it a little bit about that kind of higher end. One of the struggles we are seeing, and this goes back to, our best source of affordable housing is our existing housing stock. But one of the challenges we're going to see probably for the next couple of years is individuals who refinanced in those homes at 3%. It's going to take a little bit more to motivate them to move. And to jump now to a 6%, a big life change, they've just seriously outgrown it, whatever, or they're moving to the community and moving here. And, it's interesting that we definitely hear that higher end we need, because we're trying to, we heard it in some of our listening sessions to attract the executives and, our surgeons and all of those individuals who are looking for housing, and we want them here and not in our surrounding communities. Sorry,
Right.
Surrounding communities.
Well, we've got all of that in the mix,
Yeah.
and I'll touch on that here in a little bit, too. So we talk about things I know that we've done here as a council. We obviously have utilized TIF. Now, we have some opponents to that, but I think for the most part, our council's in agreement that that's been a good tool for us, and I think if you go out and look at what's been built, you'll understand why that's been important. One builder in particular, who has built hundreds of homes, stated within the last year, but for TIF, they would only been able to build about 25% of what they've built thus far, and we have an entire section of town that's been developed because of TIF and what they've been able to do. And I know, again, there's different views on that. We have life safety grants that we've used here to help with the cost of fire suppressant systems, which just help people developing downtown units, which has been good for us. We've changed zoning requirements to where we could shrink lots to get smaller homes and utilize that land better. What else is out there that you've seen that communities such as ours can use to help get over this hump that we need? Has anything come to mind with all the communities that you've been associated
With regards to lot production?
Or, yeah, just any way to keep those costs low and help stimulate that building?
Yeah, I think the but-for is a really good point, and I'd re-emphasize that it's just today with the costs and to put all the infrastructure in, a private developer usually can't carry that amount of debt and hold it for as long as it would take for a subdivision to fill out. And so that's, we're seeing that shift, not just in Nebraska, but really across the region. There's a lot of, sometimes some of the most innovative things that we see is actually in our smallest communities, because what we'll refer to as their absorption rate is so much slower. So when a development gets done, it takes them so much longer to build out that development because they're maybe only building 2-3 units a year. So in those places, we've seen some innovative things where community members have come together and sold local bonds to get housing or to get production happening. And so just some things like that. Now, I would say, or we see, communities assisting actually with the city, actually assisting with the infrastructure development, kind of front-ending that a little bit more. A lot of times for that, especially for a city your size, I would say in that case, it should only be done for you're trying to reach a very specific price point and you tie that to that, or that you're trying to get a very, riskier product, what's viewed as a product type. I don't know if there's necessarily a product type that I would call risky here in Grand Island anymore. You've seen such good variety. But there's some of those things that we've seen. Probably some of the most innovative stuff has been some grassroots efforts of kind of selling local bonds and getting people kind of grassroots-wise interested in taking those projects on. But I would see that happening here because not because you're trying to get the $450,000 home built, but because you're trying to get the $280,000, $250,000 home built.
Like the mayor, I was intrigued with the nonprofit aspect, and I was wondering, which the same type of questions he was asking, where are these people and how can we shake them out of the out of the woods here, because that would be great. When I look at studies like this, I'm always intrigued by the numbers, and the numbers saying, okay, we need 3,000 units in the next 10 years. I always get a hold of my good buddy Chad Nabity and say, okay, Chad, I'm kind of interested what's in the pipeline, because I want to know what's going on. We've been through a lot of approvals here over the last many years, but not everything obviously has been built. But it's kind of in the pipeline. It's sitting here waiting for the right conditions to where it can happen. Chad gave me some good numbers today and yesterday. Gave me some good numbers yesterday. And I did tabulate them because he listed them by different projects that have occurred over the last year or two or three. But what I found and what he shared with me is the number, and I'm looking at that 300 a year. That number stands out to me. How are we tracking if we could try to keep up with 300 a year? The good news is we have a lot of good stuff here in the pipeline. We really do. When we take a look at the rental side, with some things that we've just talked about in the last 6 to 12 months, we have upwards of 763 potential rental units that can be built. And within this calendar year, I am very comfortable that about 300 of those are going to be built. That would include legacy apartments that are going on. We have the Talent apartments that'll be going on. The Vets Home, Anderson, it's called the Anderson Building, I guess. I just had a chance to tour that today. Those units are within weeks of being ready for people to occupy. I think that's roughly 48 units. They're very beautiful, very nice, brand new everything inside there. And I visited with the chief construction group there today just to see how things were going, and it's coming along very well. But with those 48, coupled with the others that we've got, we should have about 300 rental units should be done by the end of this calendar year. That's good news. And they're going to be eaten up just like that, I guarantee you. I'm not so sure on the other side, the owner-occupied. I know we have a lot of things out there. They're not going to be built at that rate, but we do know that we do have more work in Copper Creek. We know that Legacy is building some homes. I know that there's been some lots already sold out there, 22. They're going to be the higher end. Those will be coming. We have Millennial Estates, which is in the pipeline. And then we have 3 groups here. So on that side, I'm looking at roughly 368 over the next few years, 368 owner-occupied more than likely. That's just those 2 groups. But then I take a look at what we have, what I call kind of a mixed group. That would be what I call the Nicodeme Super Bowl area. Those of us in Grand Island know where that's at. That's kind of a mixed. I think it's going to be some rentals. I think it's going to be some owner-occupant. We have the Mesner next to Super Saver parking lot up around 5 Points, Super Saver store. That's going to be a mix. Already 22 units have been built of duplexes, and I'm sure he's going to be working on the next 22. But there are also going to be some owner-occupant homes along that strip. And then we have Orchard, and I'm not sure, but I think that's still a mix, isn't it? That's some owner-occupied and some rentals. So that group number, these are all on paper, all planned, 238. So when I lump all those numbers together, as we take a look at what can happen over the next few years with what we have, and that's not counting one of our rental proposals with Woodsonia out at the new Conestoga Marketplace, which could be between 250 and 350 units of rentals. That's over 1,300, almost 1,400 potential units that we have already on paper in the pipeline. So I think we're sitting pretty darn well overall as we look forward. And what really excites me the most is this first 300 that I think we can knock out within this first calendar year. And then we just continue to build on that. So we've still got some good things happening in Grand Island. I personally prefer the rentals at this point because they're just easier to get into while we plan for the owner-occupied homes and people to get their finances in order. But I think when I look at the mix, I'm happy with where Grand Island's at, although we have a huge need facing us. But on paper, we're almost 50% there as we look forward. And that makes me happy to know that we've been planning that way and that we can progress in a positive manner. So again, your numbers are something we want to strive for, but I think we're on a pretty good track to to get there. So thank you.
Well, and hopefully it lays the groundwork, because as all of those projects, they take a while to ramp up, right? So we need that ramping up to be happening that we'll be seeing in, we're 2025 already, aren't we? That we'll be seeing in 2028 and 2029 and 2030, and yeah.
Absolutely. And then if we can see some positive interest rate drops, I mean, this is all going to boost everything. So again, appreciate your study and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Sheard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I enjoyed looking through the study, the full study that we were given, and I appreciate your abbreviated version. We'll do our best to lengthen it out during this meeting. I, too, like the mayor and Mitch, found it interesting that utilizing our current stock, as they talked about, are there programs, is that something that the nonprofit have helped with in some of the communities? You know, we have like Habitat for Humanity, which builds new houses, but do they have renovations of old houses or programs of some sort to move people out and then fix them up and move people in if they need it?
One of the common programs that we'll see, and this is actually a very successful program that NeighborWorks Northeast Nebraska has done, and it's a purchase rehab resale program. They've done, I haven't checked with them in the last year or two, but they had done over 140 homes in Columbus in this program, so they're probably, I don't know, they're well over 150 at this point, I'm sure. But they go in, now I always say, I put a little caveat on it, it's not necessarily the home that has been abandoned and the roof's falling in and no one's occupied it in 10 years and it needs $200,000 worth of work. They can't make those numbers work, but it's a very successful program of getting those homes that they need a new roof, they need a new HVAC system, the siding needs to be replaced, whatever it might be. Those improvements are done. They go in, they purchase the home, they do the rehab on it, and then they sell it to a qualifying household. So it maintains that affordability. So it's a program that I often advocate for, and we see some of the nonprofits doing it because it's really meant to be one of those where it's hopefully they break even.
Mm-hmm. And I read in the study a little bit, I think I understood it, that the house is in the program and the homeowner can get into a program like that, but once they exceed the income, they've got to move on. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. No, not in the purchase rehab resale program. That's usually applies more to a lot of our rental programs that are used. So in Nebraska or under most federal programs, at least, or even some of our low-income housing tax credit projects and so forth, when a household, when they reach a certain income limit, if they're no longer qualifying, then they have to move on to a market rate unit, and it frees it up, obviously, for the next. The challenge with that we've seen in so many markets is the household that says, if I take the $1 raise an hour, I might lose my housing, but it's not enough of a raise to really be able to go out and find another housing unit at market rate that we can afford or come up with all the deposits and all of that. So one of the things that we've tried to encourage in a number of the studies is where can we find programs, and those usually have to be kind of a little bit more local, but allow individuals to kind of build wealth, I guess, and stability before they move on. I will also say one of the interesting inputs we also had from a developer in another community is sometimes they weren't interested in getting involved in affordable housing projects because they didn't want to have the ongoing costs of tracking all of those every year. So they're going to do an income check when somebody moves in, but under those programs, they have to do an income check every year. And they were like, we can fill a unit. I don't need to do that hassle. But under this program, under this kind of strategy, they have to qualify that person upon initial entry, but then they might not have to requalify again until that person moves out. So it's just kind of a nice way to maybe help both the household like build some financial stability, but also maybe make a program more appealing to our developers.
I appreciate that explanation because I was kind of confused about that. Like you said, $1 raise, not worth it. Can't get to the next step, especially if we don't have inventory in that area. So I guess you touched on the houses might not be the dilapidated, or I found it interesting that the vacant housing, they're zombie houses, or however we say that. We've talked about that number in town. I've been in meetings, I've been in discussions where people will say, oh, there's 1,000 of those houses. And that's just not true, is it? There's maybe 500, you said? In
Yeah,
the study?
so when we take a little bit, this is based on their census data, and this is where the registry might help with this a little bit. But the census estimates that you have about 57% of your vacant units are what is classified as other vacant. So 560-some units or so that are classified as this other vacant. All the other ones are seasonally occupied, which gets counted. So snowbirds' homes, if they're in Arizona when the census is taking place, that unit gets counted as vacant. We're not going to fill that unit, right? It's still their home when half the year when they want to be here. If units are just in the process of being rented out when that happens, so those are on the market, and we're probably going to be filling them. Or a for sale unit, it's on the market, we're going to fill it. So the ones we really look at are what they categorize as other vacant. So these are the units that somebody's just not interested in renting or selling. They're using it for storage now. Mom or dad went to assisted living and we're not quite ready to sell it yet. All of those reasons that it's maybe potentially sitting vacant, but it's not probably going to be on the market in any immediate future. Now, so we can get some of those onto the market, but we're not going to solve the whole problem by that, yeah.
So when we talked about the nonprofit helping with some of these programs, I had those same questions. I think we got enough answers on that, but one of the things you said on the 60-40 split. Mm-hmm. So I think we all read about these generational changes. Do you take that into consideration, generational trends and how they would apply here?
Yeah, a little bit. So one of the things that's really interesting that we've seen across the board is between 2010 and 2020 in the census count numbers, the percentage of renter occupied went up. And that's true for almost every community. It was true here too. There's a variety of different reasons for that. A lot of people who were waiting to get into the housing market coming out of the recession, and just, other reasons. I think that's the other thing that we hear a lot about too is kind of the financial now with student loan debt and just other debts. The households are putting off home purchasing a little bit longer. I wouldn't say it's maybe quite as much of a trend that we see here in the Midwest as you maybe do in other locations, but that is a little bit of a factor that we do try to take into consideration. I think the other interesting part of it will be that we're also going to see, I think, more people on the other end. We often think about it as the young in households that are putting off or staying in rentals longer. We're also actually seeing more the retiree empty nesters who are actually also interested in moving into some of the rental products too. So, which was not the case when I started doing this 20-some years ago. Most of those individuals, they wanted to keep their equity and keep their ownership, but we're seeing more people saying, somebody else can mow.
I think I have a 23-year-old that when we talk about this, he says, yeah, I would buy a house if I could get into one. Now, he lives in D.C., but it's not that his generation, maybe he doesn't speak
Right.
for them, but it's not that they don't want to move on from rentals. It's that, as we find here, there's not a lot of openings for them. So I just was curious about your research on that.
And I think your point about kind of locational piece of it's also true. I was working in Indiana and talking with a young 20-something-year-old who was actually from the Washington state area, and she goes, I was just amazed when I moved to this part of the country and that so many people my age were just like, yeah, we'll own a home someday. She's like, that is so far out of reach. So it is very much a kind of geographical piece of it too.
Last question I have, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but you do this in a lot of cities and you had some advice. When you talk about using TIF and being different programs, and we use it for a lot of things, do you see cities that have a philosophy on TIF to say, we're going to prioritize these housing projects over these in giving that? Is there advice that you would give on that or suggestions? I
would say I haven't necessarily seen that in Nebraska. I'm not going to say that hasn't happened because I haven't worked with every city in Nebraska. I haven't necessarily seen that. We've talked a little bit about something similar to that with some communities in Kansas for a program that they have that's very much like TIF, but it's specific. It's their rural housing incentive districts, and it's kind of set up like a TIF, but it's meant specifically for cities under 50,000. Actually, I think they raised it to 60,000 so that Salina would qualify. But there's been a little bit of that conversation in there where it's, do they want to use that program to get $500,000 homes built, or do they want to use it to, but again, it just kind of varies from community to community, and I think it really kind of depends on how much energy and momentum is there to see construction happening.
I think it's interesting. I hadn't thought about having a specific philosophy or something this council could say, well, that doesn't hit our threshold, or we already have so many of those, so,
Yeah.
let's hold off on that type. We've talked about workforce housing, we've talked about micro TIF, we've got a lot of these different types of programs. But having a set philosophy to say, well, according to the housing study, we need $200,000 houses, don't bring TIF to us if it's not for a 200 to 280 type thing.
So I will say, maybe not so much on TIF, but we've definitely seen it of establishing kind of philosophy, policies around what incentives and how we're going to use them. So actually, Salina is a great example of this. We worked with them on that, of identifying kind of the incentives that they have and the products and price points that they wanted to say, these types of things get first priority in these different incentives. So we definitely have seen that.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the very brief presentation.
Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been doing some of my own research on the affordable housing issues as well, and it's kind of my understanding that your typical starter home would be about 1,500 square feet or less, is my understanding. And basically, since the Great Recession, the development of these type of properties has been cut significantly. With the shortage of the new development of these type of homes, is that creating a lot more competition with buyers, like regular average home buyers versus institutional and commercial buyers of the existing stock in these markets?
So you're talking about the the investors who come in and are purchasing
Correct.
those homes. It depends on them. Yes, we definitely, I don't know if I'm going to say that as a blanket statement here in Grand Island, but we've seen that in some other markets. I do think it's really interesting. Those, the kind of corporate investors, they're interested in the markets where they don't think housing's being produced. Because they want to know that they can easily rent or fill that unit. So in the markets where things are being produced, that you're seeing less of that kind of happening. So that's where I feel like we didn't hear about that much in our discussions, in our stakeholder groups and listening sessions. And I think it's probably because you have been seeing a good number of at least rentals being built. But yeah, that's always a concern. I talked about that for years in other communities that just weren't seeing any rental production happening. My comment would be your rental demand is being bared on the backs of your single-family detached older homes because they're getting picked up and rented out because there isn't other rentals being built. So.
And then as far as building new stock of starter homes, do you think maybe the best course of action is to work with the nonprofit type of developers, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's other things I think you can do too to work with the for-profit market side. Again, it depends on the price point you want to look at, and what are the lot costs and all of those things that we can help. Maybe one of the things I've heard is the dirt, and what goes into the dirt sometimes is one of the bigger pieces of that. It's 20%, 25% of the final sale price of the home. So.
And then, just what are the other biggest challenges to developers to make those type of properties successful?
Well, I think the other piece that I should add to what I said earlier too is just that the other options that we need to be thinking about besides the single-family detached home, so that additional variety that we can maybe get. But I always do caution, and when I say that you might see the townhomes being built, but that doesn't mean you're still going to get them at $200,000, especially if the buyer's coming in and saying, well, we want the nice finishes and all of those things. That's going to drive that price up. I had one community where it was like, all of our buyers want heated floors. Well, that's nice, but that's not going to be affordable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Hossie.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment on two things. You know, one topic is TIF, that you've heard about, and the other one is about valuations, which was on your slide. You know, with a recent example in the TIF, the village of Caro was at a project that they were TIFing $16,000 per unit. And compared to Grand Island on the same issue is we're almost near $50,000 per unit. And so I think what the council supports TIF and has for a long time, but it's getting to the limit to where you're taking every political subdivision and you're removing any revenue to support the growth. And so every political subdivision, including schools, are probably the biggest hit. They're not getting any revenue for 15 to 20 years. And it's their ability to respond to the growth without any money. You know, and in a school system, I mean, you could put a kindergartner in at the beginning and they'd graduated from high school before you ever saw a penny. So it's that challenge with the political subdivisions is how do we deal with the growth and the need for services. And so at $50,000 a unit, that's probably on the high side that we've ever seen. You know, and I don't know if there should be a limit. I think you maybe mentioned 60,000 in Salina. But, you know, I mean, that's where we're faced with those kind of limits. We've used it a lot. And I don't know where the limits are, but I think we're pretty close to the upper limit of what we can do as a municipality. The second thing is on valuations. Valuations are a problem, and I hear it all the time, particularly as the property tax statements go out. One of the things that I would say, you talked about the number of owner-occupied being over age 55. Well, that gets down to the fixed income group. And just between, and my personal example is between the Social Security increase this year and my military pension this year, my property tax and my house insurance took up 150% of that, probably more than 150% of that. And so the money that I have for 2025 to pay for the groceries and the other items with inflation is less than zero. You know, and so it's that push on seniors that the valuation is becoming more realistic, more of a problem for seniors who are trying to stay in their house. You know, and what we don't want to do, we don't want to push seniors out of their house, particularly if they lost a spouse or something like that. You know, and so that's where the valuation is really becoming an issue, is that it's taken up all the money that we would normally have for groceries and utilities that we now don't have. And I know that everybody comes in front of here and says, well, it's only a 6% increase. It's only a 3% increase. But for the people that are those homeowners, they're faced with a very different struggle than a young family might be facing. So I just wanted to share those two comments.
Yeah, just for clarity, so when I was talking about the Salina, that was 60,000 in population.
Okay.
To get into that program.
Yeah, just it's on a TIF thing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
when we're TIFing, giving, you know, $50,000 worth of money back per unit, you know, that's where it's I think we're almost at our limit. And to Mitch's point is we liked supporting TIF, and we have historically, but I think there is a top side for us as well, given what what's the effect is happening on school systems and on municipalities. So.
You mentioned that your company worked with Salina, Kansas to develop priorities. What did you do?
I'm not going to have all of that off the top of my head, but part of it was just looking at some of the different, a little bit of maybe backstory. They had a huge increase in workforce that they were experiencing by a couple industries that were one industry in particular that was opening and was bringing in, I don't remember the exact number now, something like 500 jobs or something like that. The legislature actually in Kansas even gave some earmark funds, I guess you'd call them earmark funds, basically to them because they saw that they had this housing issue with the job growth that they were having. But one of the things they wanted to look at was how do we begin to look at the programs that we have and how do we use those programs to help us meet the different price points we needed. So we kind of laid out a strategy to help them say, okay, here's, if they're producing in these price points, units in these price points, these are the types of incentives that they might be eligible for. So it just kind of helped out. And again, that's going to vary from community to community and the types of incentives and programs that you have. They actually had a really interesting story too back when one of the early projects we did with them, because they used mostly special assessments to get lot development done. And they basically stopped doing that because they wanted to encourage more infill development, and basically all it did was completely stop development. So this would have been in the early 2010s. And so that was part of, it all kind of grew out of that, about how do we continue to use some of these different tools and mechanisms, but get the housing built that we need to be seeing happening. I don't know if I totally answered your question there, but.
I understand it's ultimately for the elected officials to determine how they want to prioritize housing going forward. But the housing study talks in terms of we need this many units, which is kind of like saying we need this many widgets, and there's no prioritization. So that's why I was interested in what you did in Salina, Kansas. And that's something your firm still offers as a service?
Yeah, yep, it was kind of separate from their housing study, or an addendum maybe is a good way to describe it, yeah.
Very much appreciate you being here. We have another speaker who'd like to talk. Thank you for your study. Mr. Pools?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I had some concerns, and I think, Mr. Hawsey, you hit on the edge of it. First of all, these Salina, Kansas, Colorado, or whatever town in Colorado, they have much more state support for these programs. These, like in Nebraska, we have LB 840, we have TIF, we have the Workforce Housing Plan that are all subsidized by the state. Now, Kansas has 1 million more people than we do, so maybe they have more funds to do these types of issues. But my big concern is, with 3,000 units is the population of the schools. And most of these projects will be built with taxpayer funds. Our state auditor speculates that tax increment financing is one of the reasons that property taxes increase so much. My issue is, who is going to, Woodsonia is planning to put a 2,000 unit apartment or 2,000 housing units when they get their project underway there in the old vets land. So 2,000 units, how many, do we have numbers, speculation perhaps, on how many students will be coming here? Because I'm sure these are not going to be moving from one side of town to the other. That we have Grand Island, Grow Grand Island people that promote immigration. And I don't know the numbers of income numbers or things like that, but they're promoting immigration. So, and we just renewed their contract last year, $500,000. Do we really need to be promoting immigration if we have this housing crunch? I know we can't find the people. We don't have a workforce. We're always looking for people. Maybe it's time for the government to get out of subsidizing development at this stage of the game with the unemployment rate where it's at. Because we need to look at, Woodsonia project, I'll go back to that. There is, I believe I saw, there's an area, 12, 15 acres, whatever, for a future elementary school. Who's going to pay for that when all this housing is being built with TIF funds? I looked up at the Talon Apartments. I believe their increment is $42,000. The city share is like $600 of the property taxes. If I'm reading that correctly. If I'm wrong, let me know. This is a lot of money that we're not getting into the city, and who's going to be paying that? And that's going to be the owner-occupied property tax owners. We were talking about closing Seedling Mile School now. And we're talking about adding 3,000 units, which is going to be at least 1,000 students. You can figure 33%. Where are we going to put them? Who's going to pay for the new schools that we need? And I think any of this talk about new housing units needs to be looked at, as we talked, with discretion, because you're not going to be able, I'm not going to be able to afford your property taxes anymore. I will be forced off of my property. I'm on fixed income, pension, Social Security, and I'm still, my property tax is nearly doubled. So I would just like you to bear in mind that these housing studies need to also contain the other costs that are going to be involved in this number of housing units: schools, teachers, road maintenance, sewer systems, wastewater treatment, the power grid. These things need to be paid for by somebody, and if we're subsidizing the builders to put these new houses up that we desperately need, who's left to pay those peripheral costs? And really, teachers in schools, fire department, police department, that's not really peripheral, that is a necessity. And that's what I would love for you to consider when you proceed with our next tax incrementally finance program, our next LB 840 program, our workforce housing program. We need to be looking at, this is the projected numbers of students that are going to be coming into town. This is the buildings that we're going to have to build, the teachers we're going to have to hire, policemen. These things have not been considered very well, I think, in any of our tax subsidized housing projects, whether it's Copper Creek or whoever. These are things that need to be looked at. We need to actually have this idea that it's a wonderful, TIF is wonderful. Let's start getting statistics in there. This is the number of students we're going to have. This is the number of buildings we're going to need. This is the number of teachers we're going to need. And then figure out what we can afford. Okay? That's all I got. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you again to RDG for this comprehensive study and for the entities that made it happen, the Economic Development Corporation along with the city. NIFA grant was mentioned, the Community Development Block Grants, and the CRA. This has been very helpful and very informational. Thank you again for your presentation. Council members, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, items 7A through 7N, omitting O, which we'll take up separately? Mr. Stelp.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve the consent agenda except for number O.
Thank you. Mr. Sheard?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
Agenda item 7O, approving update of the designated depositories list. Good evening, Mr. Gleason.
Mayor and City Council. So this item, the designated depositories, in order for, through the sections of code that are in that resolution, specifies that for the city treasurer to deposit funds at these institutions, it has to be an approved list, and so that would be approved by City Council. And so what we were trying to do was, it had been since 2019 since we had updated the list, and some of the businesses had gone out of business, and some of the banks had changed names and merged and all that sort of stuff. So, and then we've been having institutions ask us for, can we get on your designated depositories? Because they realize that you have to be approved by the City Council before the funds could be stored there. And again, we were looking at and the reason we added so many, there's been a lot of growth in Grand Island just with the different kinds of banks and all that sort of stuff. And so it was really for flexibility for if we want to do a bid out for CD rates or whatever. And then, because sometimes it's time sensitive if you did that and then you're like, oh, well, we got to go get it on to council meeting and get it approved so we can go with this bank or that bank. And so the thinking was that we would just get them approved as they have been asking to be approved, to be considered for, like if we bid out a CD rate, a CD, for example, not just always going with the places we've done business for, but be able to offer that to more. And then a question had come up about where do we have money now, and I can give you that information now, not the amounts, but just we don't have money everywhere, but we do have quite a few. So we've got Pinnacle Bank has money, 5 Points Bank, Cornerstone, D.A. Davidson. So I guess that wasn't as many as I thought in my head. So that's where we have funds now. The other ones are that they would be available to, and again, if you guys want us to come back one at a time or whatever, that's fine. It's just sometimes when the rates are going up and down and you're trying to lock something in, or we have something mature and not knowing is one of these new banks, because sometimes they'll sweeten the deal for, because they want to get business going and so we're just trying to keep the maximum flexibility to get the biggest bang for your buck for that, that we are investing properly. And again, and the other, real quick, that in those sections of the statutes, it also has the FDIC is only however much it is, 250,000 or whatever, that we also get collateralized, like we get letters of commitment and collateralized so that we're protected. And that's in the 1943 code that you have to do that. And so we have to do that, regardless, we have to make sure that we would never, that they pledge securities that would cover if something ever happened, and we'd be able to get our money back so that we wouldn't be out just because we're over the 250 FDIC limit. So, and I'm willing to take any questions or.
Thank you. We'll see if there's a motion.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Sheard?
Thank you. I move that we pass 7-0.
And Mr. Brown?
I second that motion.
Discussion, Mr. Hawsey?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Matt, the reason I asked the question, what you have brought to us tonight is basically a list of every bank that's within 20 miles of Grand Island. And as a council member, I don't know that I want to do business with every one of those banks.
Okay.
I may or I may not, but I think the one thing that I would like to see as a council member, because the process of putting public funds in a private bank, it's a little bit different in that we do require each of them to collateralize our deposits. That process, my guess is some of these, maybe even half of these, wouldn't want to do that. Or they may based on the rate they give you, but I'm like, it's a challenge for banks to do that. They might benefit from it in the long term, but I'm like, it's a strategy the bank either takes on or I don't want to just give you blanket authority to do business with every bank in 20 miles because, quite frankly, I don't know that that's wise for us to do. There's a reason that you come to us and say, yeah, this is our list of institutions, and every time that they merge or every time that they change hands, you should be coming to us anyway. You shouldn't come to us every 5 years. You should come to us whenever one of those institutions changes legal form, whatever their legal form is. But I think the process that I would like you to do is, if there was a letter from each of these banks and saying we would gladly collateralize your deposits if you choose to pick us for a CD or whatever, then I would probably be okay looking at the list. But without that letter, having them wanting to be on the list, they may call you, but they may not understand what it takes on their end. You know, and frankly, I know that you invest a lot of the city's money. I mean, that's what your job is. And you respond to citizens, and we're the kind of the go-between. I don't know how well your investments have been doing. I don't see anything to be able to say, you know, you come from the educational world. I don't know if you give it an A or a B or a C or a D or an F. I don't know. But I should know. I should be able to say, yeah, we're doing C work. You know, and it's not the same as in a private person, but personally, my worst investment was a CD. I probably had a 5% CD at one of these banks this year, and that was my worst performing investment for 2024. You know, but I'd like to make sure that they want to collateralize the deposits, anything that we do, and then that way, as a council person, I'm sure that they're in the game. I don't like just a blanket list of everybody, because then we're not really dealing with the intent of the statute.
Mr. Nickerson.
Well, I think Mr. Hawsey brings up some good points here. Is there any reason why you chose, we're saying you, it may not have just been you, but why all of these particular institutions were chosen, and any reason in particular?
Some of them had asked to be added, and then since we were updating them, we noticed that some of them had gone out of business. Like we were just, I think, like you said, we should have not waited 5 years or how many years. But then it was brought up to me that maybe there's been a lot of new banks in town. Maybe they would want to bid for CD rates and stuff like that. So I was tasked with going back and calling up all the banks and asking, would you want to be on the list or not? And this is kind of what it entails. And all the new ones said yes, and so I added them to the list. So, yeah, we can definitely, I mean, if you want to get commitments from them up front or whatever, or, I mean, it's whatever you guys want to do. I mean, we're good right now with the, you know, like the ones we only put things on the we only put money where you guys have approved, because it has to be an approval by the city council. And so all of our money is in those approved. So it was just basically, did we want to have bigger pools if we wanted to go bid out a CD rate or something matured and try to see if one of these other banks wanted to get in on that. So, but yeah, if you want me to, you know, I can call them back and talk about letters of commitment or collateralized or kind of, it was a very brief, just, you know, calling them all and, you know, hey, do you want to be put on the list so that you could ever, oh yeah, that's great, you know, and some of them had, oh, we need to talk to our COO and he'll give you a call tomorrow, and just kind of, so some did it just spur of the moment, just, oh yeah, that'd be great. And then some of them were like, I need to talk to my VP and you know, all this sort of stuff, so.
Well, I think, again, coming from the mind and insight of a finance director, former finance director, is a different perspective than a lot of the rest of us when we think about this. So I appreciate Chuck bringing that to our attention. I don't know the policies of the council or the city when we talk about investing locally versus abroad. I don't know what that is, and I don't know of all these that you've selected, you know, what that policy is. Do we want to focus on local, investing locally, because those banks are the ones that engage in this community? And I don't know the whole laundry list. I could probably pull it up, but I don't know the whole laundry list. Is there any of those that we would not consider local?
Yeah, there's some national ones in there that, well, they've got local branches though. Some of them, like D.A. Davidson, where the fire and police pension are. I'm not sure if they're a local bank or not.
Well, I would just ask again, I don't know that we have a policy. I know a lot of times we talk about supporting local for reasons, and the banks that come to mind, and when I say local, we still have Nebraska banks. Pinnacle, I think, is a Nebraska bank. We have 5 Points, which is homegrown. We've got Equitable, and I know all these banks, but I don't know how they all fit in the list that we've got here. And I don't know if it's a policy, or if we need a policy, or if it even matters. But I do believe, to Chuck's point, it probably makes sense to know who's capable of collateralizing everything that we do need, because we do have lots of cash at times that we need to park somewhere, and it's a lot more than $250,000. How long would it take you to kind of wean through these, whittle through them, and see what makes sense? Is it another month or so if we were to postpone this? What do you?
Yeah, I could probably, sorry, I've been sick here. Yeah, I could probably, get on the horn tomorrow and, bring it to the next meeting here or in February or wherever you guys.
I'd say what's reasonable? What's a reasonable time? We don't want to crunch any, but I think it's a fair question, and
Hopefully I could help you out here. So, we did a banking RFP back in 2018, right before I got here, and we moved from Wells Fargo to 5 Points. So all of our deposits, all of our main banking is at 5 Points because of that agreement. Now, when we shop CDs, we'll put out an email to all these different banks. At a certain time, we get back our bids, okay? Some of these CDs are backed what they call by CDARs, which is Certificate of Deposit Account Registry. What that means is if I put out a $5 million CD, that is spread out among a bunch of different banks for that insurance to be covered. So that's one way that they get covered. The other way is like 5 Points, they're a big bank. They have a lot of assets and they can cover that. And that's why they can cover our account. And so what I did in the last, it's probably been about a year and a half ago maybe, is with the CD rates, we were getting pretty low rates and we had to tie it up for, we were anywhere from 6 months to 12 months to 24. So working with Tim at 5 Points Bank, we've actually created a money market account, and we sweep money into that account nightly, and it's earning CD rates. I think right now it's 4%. So last year, general fund earned $2 million in interest. So we're doing pretty good with our pooled cash. So we're covered insurance-wise. We're keeping our liquidity and getting good returns.
but what's being proposed tonight is to have other people available for CDs, it sounds like.
Right, it is, and it's just, as Matt said, when you put out a bid, you're going to put it out for a certain day, and you have only a certain amount of time to get it converted, so.
Okay. Any personal thoughts, because there'll be personal thoughts about investing locally versus anybody that wants to offer to buy your CD, I mean, that you can put your money in?
We prefer local, yeah, absolutely. So I will tell you that when we put bids out, it's been fewer and fewer and fewer. So it wasn't
fewer people
bidding on it.
Interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then the ones that we do have, the 6-month rates are better than the 12-month or 24-month. So
Right.
it's upside down. So
Yes, and that's because they don't know what's happening in the future.
exactly
here.
right.
Well, again, I don't have the whole list in front of me. I don't know if it's 5, 10, or 100, but it's, is it something that's worth spending a little time on paring down, and you think so? Just to be sure that everything's covered the way it should be.
Yeah, we could kind of, not pre-qualify them, but I could go back and instead of just a soft yes, make sure that they understand if you did, if we had a $5 million CD, what you'd be looking at and how to collateralize, and do you have the ability to do that? So, yeah, I could go back and do that for the new banks that are being added, so.
Okay. Well, I'll let Mike talk, but then if Chuck or somebody wants to make a motion to postpone this to a future meeting, I'm supportive of that.
Mr. Pollitt?
Yeah. Pat, Matt, either one of you can answer this question. It seems to me that things have been working fine. So do we really actually need to add these other ones? If we're getting less and less bids on our stuff, it doesn't sound, and that may be because we only use one bank because they're giving us the best rates. But if they're giving us the best rates now, they're probably going to give us the best rates tomorrow. I would like to see this thing, tabled, postponed, brought back in a couple weeks, and we can talk about it after you talk to the banks. I would make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second to Mr. Pollock's motion? Suggested date.
The next meeting is the 28th.
Mr. Pollock, are you suggesting the meeting of January 28th?
I am suggesting that we postpone this for 2 weeks.
That is the
I guess that's as clear as I can be. Bring it back in a couple weeks and we'll look at it.
Mr. Hossie,
Thank you, Mayor. I'd second the motion.
any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
We'll now take up our public hearings. Public hearing 8A. Public hearing request from Tabs Carts LLC, DBA Swing 18 Indoor Golf, 222 West Stolly Park Road for a Class I liquor license. Mrs. Grenier.
Thank you, Mayor. An application for a Class I liquor license was filed with the Liquor Control Commission and received by the city on December 18th, 2024. A notice to general public of date, time, and place of hearing was published on January 4th, 2025. A notice to the applicant of date, time, and place of hearing was mailed on December 19th, 2024, along with Chapter 4 City Code alcoholic beverages. Departmental reports were received as required by City Code, and recommendation is to approve upon final inspection. Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this item? If not, public hearing is now closed.
Council, is there a motion on Resolution 2025-13? Mr. Brown
I move we approve 2025-13.
and Mr. Hossie.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd second the motion.
Please vote. Motion adopted.
Public hearing 8B, public hearing on acquisition of utility easement 3441 Innate Lane, Teta Hospitality. Mr. Schmitz, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a 20-foot easement for electrical service to the New Hampton Inn going at Legacy 34.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this item? If not, public hearing is now closed.
Council, a motion is in order. Mr. Pollock
I would make a motion to approve 2025-14.
and Mr. O'Neill. I second that motion. Any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
8C, public hearing on acquisition of utility easement 3925 West Capitol, Staroska Group Unlimited, Inc. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a 10-foot easement to allow us to connect a radial feed to loop feed it to the rest of the feeder. So expansion of the distribution system.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this item? If not, public hearing is now closed.
Council members, a motion is in order. Mr. Sheard.
Thank you. I move that we pass 2025-15.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I second that motion.
Any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
8D, public hearing on acquisition of utility easement 2723 North Shady Bend Road, Michael and Lauren Schumacher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a 20-foot easement to provide electrical service to private residents on Shady Bend.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this item? If not, public hearing is now closed.
Council, is there a motion? Mr. O'Neill?
I motion that we pass
2025-16.
Thank you, Mr. Stelp.
I second the motion.
Any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
8E, public hearing on acquisition of public right-of-way for South Locust Street improvements, Fauner Park Road to Second Street, project number 2021-P-6, JNIK LLC, KCD Rentals LLC, Central District Health Department, Favinger, Wagoner, and Davis. Mr. Kurtz?
Yes, so this is the continuation of an item that we started a couple weeks ago to acquire right-of-way along the Locust corridor for the upcoming street improvement project that we're working on. So we need to acquire additional right-of-way in that area to accommodate the street improvement project.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz.
Public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak on this item? If not, public hearing is now closed.
Is there a motion, council? Mr. Pollock?
Yes, I'd make a motion to approve 2025-17.
And Mr. Still.
I second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Any discussion? Mr. Nickerson?
Keith, I'm going from memory now, reading through the packet, and it seems to me like I saw some significant amount of area that seemed to be coming around the health department section there. Is there a major change that's going to be happening there, or is this my imagination playing tricks on me here?
Just in general, we are looking at, most of it is for sidewalks. So right now, the sidewalks are really close to the street, right against the back of the curb. So when we want to create that buffer space between the walk and the street, which we always try to prioritize on a street as busy as this, that's most of it. There are some other improvements, as far as the lane widths and different things like that, but those aren't as impactful as the walk itself. So just the size of that lot. We're also looking at, so that particular instance has 2 frontages. So we're also looking at some slight modifications along Fauner there. So those added up is driving most of this. Again, we're just looking for, if I could pull this up, just that extra space in between the two. Now, the walks along Fauner aren't moving as much as the ones along so you could see all that added green space is making a difference here along Locust. The walk along Fauner isn't changing as much because we didn't want to mess with their parking. But there is some additional right-of-way along the Fauner corridor as well. So all of that added together is driving that one to be a little bit bigger than the others.
So on that particular area, you're saying there'll be like the little grass area between the street and the sidewalk, which is great. I appreciate that. But will that happen down the entire project? We're going to be able to do that, or are we just able to do that in certain areas?
As much as possible. There's 2 exceptions to that at this point. We're still in negotiations, but one of them is being driven by this existing billboard sign on an adjacent property. Obviously, the cost for a billboard is quite large. Plus, if we disturb the billboard, it has to meet all the new setback standards and different things like that. So obviously, that is a potential area where the sidewalk might dip out around it, which that should hopefully be coming in future weeks. And then the other potential area, which this is an old drawing, this billboard or set of billboards up on the north end of the project is a similar type of situation. And as you can see, about 100 feet north of that billboard, we're tying into an existing sidewalk that is already on the back curb. It became a little bit of a cost-benefit ratio of whether we want to pay large sums of money to put the sidewalk where I'd like to put it versus buy out a billboard or rebuild billboards to accommodate a walk for an extra 100 foot. So that might be another area where there would be an exception, but for the rest of the corridor, we would establish that corridor between the walk and the new road.
That's interesting you say that, because as I was driving down South Locust today, almost in that area, there was a guy walking on a bunch of ice that was on the sidewalk, and I thought, but for him to slip and trip and fall into traffic, probably that much. I mean, it's just that much of margin that he would have slipped. So I really appreciate that thought going into it as well.
So I will say too, though, we will, if it will be a curbside walk, we're gonna look at a wider walk than what's there today. So typically, right now, a 4-foot walk would be a standard walk. We're at least going to look at a 6-foot walk on those situations where it's gonna be on the back of curb. That's our new standard for new construction in town. So we're going to at least meet that requirement in these couple of isolated areas.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Please vote. Motion adopted.
Resolution 9A, approving transfer of funds to Heartland Event Center Venue Works operating account. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is a request by Venue Works for an extra $200,000. As you recall, in November, you had approved funds of $100,000. And as of January 1st, they have spent $22,000 of this. They are anticipating $390,000 in startup expenses through the first quarter of '25. And with these expenses, they're waiting on revenues from events, from tickets, events, sponsorships, suite sales, and so on and so forth. So this request, they do say that they will still be within their budget for the year. And there are two Venue Works folks here this evening if you have any questions. Thank you.
Is there a motion, council? Mr. Stelp.
I move to approve Resolution 2025-18.
Mr. Pollock.
I would second that.
Discussion, Mr. Hasse.
Yes, Pat, I have a question on this. So this is similar to what we did at the golf course. And I can look out on your financial website and see financials from the golf course. Are we, or do we have now venue work financials?
We do not.
Okay, will we?
Yes.
Okay.
Monthly.
So would it be the same kind of idea that it'd be on the same finance website?
Yes, absolutely.
At the same place, so we go look at theirs and, so this gives us $300,000 in, I'll call it impress money, you know, advance just to, and this is a city checking account.
Yeah, well, it's partnership, yes. City and Venue Works, so.
Right, I understand
Yes,
that they have
yeah.
the operational responsibility, but it's still public funds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
anyway.
sir.
Yeah, as long as we have the financials, I guess I'd like to make sure that we, you know, are able to just look at it and see how they're doing.
Yes, absolutely. January being actually the start date of their contract, We expect those first financials to come in late February for January.
Yeah,
So
maybe,
kind of the same schedule as our golf course.
yeah, so maybe once you get it set up and once it gets up, posted up there, give us an email or something so we can go
Absolutely,
out and take a peek.
absolutely.
Thank you, Pat.
Sure.
Please vote. Motion adopted.
We have one ordinance, number 10,005. Is there a motion to suspend the statutory rules regarding ordinances? Mr. Lanfair.
I move that we suspend the statutory rules regarding ordinances.
And Mr. Pollock.
And I would second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Please vote. Motion adopted.
Now we take up the merits of ordinance number 10,005, consideration of amending Article 23, Chapter 6, Hotel Tax. Mrs. McAloon.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, what we are presenting tonight is a cleanup of current city code to remove the reference in the lodging tax ordinance to making payments directly to Fauner Park Exposition and Event Center Incorporated. As you know, that contract is concluded. The lodging tax is currently designated for support of the Heartland Event Center, or at that time when it was adopted, it was called the Agricultural Exposition Center, to be built and owned and operated by Fauner Park Exposition and Event Center. So we are cleaning this up and a reflection of the change in time. And the plan, the other thing I want to point out about this hotel occupation tax, as some of you know, or maybe all of you are aware, it expires at the end of 2025. So it will be a tax that will be before you again for discussion as to whether it would be extended. But it does sunset at the end of this calendar year. So we'll be bringing it back later in the year for a discussion on its purpose and its rate. It is currently at the maximum statutory rate, however. So, but we intend to present that information in a study session along with more in-depth discussions of the types of things that the lodging tax can fund, and also the food and beverage tax is tied into that, not tied into the lodging tax, but it also has limitations on how it is spent and use for agricultural shows and exhibits and entertainment events is one of those uses. So what's before you tonight is simply an ordinance deleting the limitation that the payments are to be made to Fauner Park Exposition and Event Center, and just changing it to that it's to fund the maintenance and operation of the Heartland Event Center. So we also deleted design and construction because that's been done and complete for 20 years. So that's the proposal before you. Staff's recommendation is that you approve the ordinance.
Mr. Hossie.
Thank you, Mayor. I would move to approve ordinance number 10005.
Mr. Pollock.
And I would second that.
Discussion, Mr. Sheard.
When you say that we will come back and decide what to do next, is this something that we decide, or do we have to take this to taxpayers to make that decision?
The advice I've been given is that this is a councilmanic decision. This is a tax that would be imposed by the city council.
Okay, so we don't have to do this before a November date
No.
to get it on a ballot or something?
Yeah,
I'd like
there
to.
is no election.
But
it-
that's,
It will be a council decision, hence the need to have the discussion about, do you want to continue the same use? Do you want to change it? The use of the tax is limited anyway, the type of tax. You know, for example, the county's lodging tax, 100% of it is used to fund the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Hossie.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, a lot has changed since in the last 20 years since we passed the lodging tax to support, you know, the intent of the Heartland Event Center. The city now owns 2 buildings. There's a casino that's been built up there. There's a state fair that's, going wild. And so it's a good problem to have. But events that happen now, whether it's the Heartland Event Center, for example, the cheer that will be coming up here in the next month or 2 or 3, they don't just use one facility anymore. They may do a lot in the Heartland Event Center, but they might bleed over into some other building. So these concerts and events might be more than one building, and there's a lot of buildings out there. There's State Fair buildings, there's the Heartland Event Center, there's all of these buildings. And so I think we really need to take that next step. This is a housekeeping measure, kind of cleaning up the language, as Laura mentioned, but we really need to take the next step because it has changed. And I think our intent to use this needs to change along with the times, because now we know exactly, we got 20 years of experience seeing what happens and how does it happen and how does it work. And I don't want to limit our ability to make it work, because everybody here at this table wants to make it work and be successful. So I'm looking forward to those conversations.
Mr. Stout?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am in favor of this motion. I would like to see a study session where all the partners come together and present all the facts. We got Gilka involved, we have the State Fair involved, we have Venue Works involved, and we have Fauner Park involved. And I'd like to see all the parties come, give us a presentation on what's going on there. I think what they're doing out there is beautiful. I think the casino looks good, but I just want to make sure everybody's taken care of, everybody's on the same page and on the same plan, so that we can get this thing put together and work out a deal that's not only good for Fauner Park, good for Venue Works, and good for the city. So we're all partners in this.
Please vote. Motion adopted.
We have completed our agenda. Again, I want to thank Scout Troop 316 for being here this evening and leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Have a nice evening, everybody.